We get to a college football playoff at the end of the year, and one of the main reasons we're looking and trying to compare these teams is because we're going to have to leave off a conference championship out of that Final Four. And one of the main reasons, and one of the big criteria, I believe, should be obviously those non-conference matchups that should serve as a measuring stick for the 5 power conferences. We bring in Mike Loveall to check out some of the most important and some of the top non-conference games early season that are going to set us up for conference play and give us some idea to power 5 conference play and who really is strong in 2015. So, Mike, let's bring you in here to look over the landscape of college football and pick out some of those games that you think are going to factor into the college football playoff significantly.
Great, Mark. Thanks for having me. When I looked at the early season important out-of-conference games, like you said, it really drives towards strengthening your out-of-conference resume for the college football playoffs. And really not just for that team, but for the conference. So if you're a team like Wisconsin or Arizona State, your performance out-of-conference builds your credibility for your conference. So that's kind of one of the key things I think is important about the out-of-conference game. So when I looked at my top 5 most important out-of-conference games for early in the season, really to me, my criteria was I'm looking at teams to prove who they are. Either teams that had maybe weaker 2014 seasons or teams with a lot of questions coming into 2015. So my most important early season out-of-conference game is Wisconsin versus Alabama in Arlington, Texas on September 5th. It's Paul Chryst's first year at Wisconsin. Here's the question I have for Wisconsin. Can they compete against Ohio State in the Big Ten? I think Ohio State is clearly the team in the Big Ten. You got Wisconsin, Michigan State, Michigan, and Nebraska all vying to see who that second, third team is going to be that can compete against Ohio State. If those 4 teams have good appearances out of conference, that sets Ohio State up well for the college football playoffs, even if they have one loss. Melvin Gordon's gone, but Stave is back at quarterback. For Alabama, there's more doubt around Alabama this year than there has been for the previous 4 or 5 years. A lot more teams, when you look at media voting for preseason polls, a lot more teams in the West are getting more and more votes. So there's a little bit of doubt around Alabama this year. Are they kind of in the dynastic fall cycle of that team, that program? They have questions at quarterback. They're going to have, for the 3rd straight year, they're going to have a third different starting quarterback. I think the key to this game is going to be Alabama's offense against Wisconsin's defense. I don't think Wisconsin's defense is going to be able to perform as well against Alabama's offense as the Alabama defense will against the Wisconsin offense. But I think this game is very critical because Alabama has to prove themselves again, and Wisconsin has to prove themselves and really fighting for respect in the Big Ten. So that's my number 1 most important game. Number 2, and really 1A and 1B really, is Oregon at Michigan State. Really intrigued by this game. That's the next week. That's September 12th. Oregon, you got a new quarterback. This is Mark Helfrich's team now. It's fully Helfrich's team. 2 years in college football is kind of cycling through for coaches. So will Helfrich continue the momentum that Chip Kelly built there at Oregon? Can they maintain control of the Pac-12? I think the Pac-12 is just a little bit behind the SEC as the best conference in football. I think you can make a legitimate argument that it's the best conference in football. And for the past half decade, Oregon has kind of controlled that conference for the occasional slip up against Stanford. Can Oregon maintain control of the Pac-12 with Stanford, Arizona State, UCLA all nipping at their heels, USC kind of coming back into form? So I think this is a critical statement game for Oregon as well. They got a lot like Wisconsin's 59-0 loss against Ohio State last year. Oregon kind of got beat up by Ohio State in the national championship game. Is that going to be a blueprint that Michigan State uses? On the Michigan State side of the ball, Mark D'Antonio is getting a lot of credit for being a great coach. Can he build that program? Can he continue to move that program forward? This would be a great signature win for D'Antonio. And again, they have to prove themselves in the Big Ten as well. They're in that group of 4, Nebraska, Michigan, Michigan State, Wisconsin, who are all fighting to get into position to challenge Ohio State. So that's why I think this game is so important. I think both of those games, Wisconsin, Alabama, Oregon and Michigan State are 1A and 1B as far as importance on the prove it and the national implication scene. At number 3, I've got I have Oklahoma at Tennessee. Oklahoma's coming off of an 8-5 year last year to include 4-4 in their last 8 games. It was really a disappointing season there. Trevor Knight got hurt. Some quarterback play didn't do real well in the bowl game either. So a lot of disappointment last year in Norman. Was that a blip on the radar, or again, like some people are thinking about Alabama, is Oklahoma on the decline? Is Oklahoma going to maintain their spot at the top of the Big 12, or have they ceded that top spot to TCU and Baylor for the foreseeable future, for the next 4 or 6 years? So I think this is going to be a big statement game for Oklahoma. It's a critical season for Oklahoma as they continue to move forward. Tennessee, a lot of hype at Tennessee. Butch Jones has got the program back. This will be a chance for Tennessee to prove itself after 2 great recruiting classes and a real positive offseason bowl game, big bowl victory against Iowa in January. This is going to be a huge statement game on the national scene for Tennessee. Number 4, I have Texas at Notre Dame. Notre Dame has been successful for the past couple of years, but they always seem to kind of falter at just the wrong time. They kind of always seem to be on the periphery of the outside looking in. They have not had a lot of respect, I think, on the national scene after they got destroyed by Alabama in the national championship game. So this will be a good testing ground for them. They have this game at home, so we'll see what they look like for the 2015 campaign. Texas, Charlie Strong, I think has had a tougher time in Austin getting that program back to where it was under Mack Brown in the heyday than anyone anticipated. Texas A&M leaving for the SEC kind of hurt Texas. Now you have Baylor and TCU competing in the Texas playground for all the top recruits, doing better than Texas. And Oklahoma always being there. You have Patterson as the athletic director at Texas, so there's a lot of turmoil around the Texas program. Some conflict between the head coach and the athletic director over assistant coach pay and stuff. And of course, we know how that worked out for Bielema at Wisconsin. So I'm looking at this game to really see what the state of the Texas program is. I think this is a huge game for Texas fans to see where Charlie Strong has the program. And then my number 5 game, Nebraska at Miami, September 19th. Again, Nebraska is one of those 4 teams that is competing to be the number 2 team in the Big Ten. Mike Riley's first year at Nebraska, I think it's going to be interesting to see how that works out coming over from Oregon State. They did lose Amir Abdullah, but they do have Tommy Armstrong back at quarterback, so I think their offense is still going to be pretty good. Nebraska in that group of 4, Michigan, Michigan State, and Wisconsin to compete in the Big Ten. Miami, I think Al Golden's on the hot seat. They do bring back the freshman sensation Brad Kaya there at quarterback. A lot of people have Miami as a surprise pick nationally. We will know after this game in Miami on September 19th whether or not they are there. I'll give you 2 other games just to watch out for. Texas A&M versus Arizona State, September 5th in Houston. There might be 200 points scored in that game. I don't know. And Michigan at Utah to kick the season off Thursday, September 3rd. Did not know this, but Utah is 2-1 all time against Michigan. They own a winning record against Michigan. Jim Harbaugh's first game on Thursday night. I'm going to watch that one just for the sheer entertainment factor of it. So those are my two other games outside the top 5.
Mike, it's a good list. All 5 games that you listed, plus the other 2, were initial games that I jotted down. I jotted down about 10 or 12 games and then tried to pare it down from there. Again, we're discounting those late-season matchups between the SEC and the ACC and focusing on the September schedule non-conference games. So I'm pretty much in line, but I've got them jumbled up just a bit. So at number 1, I'm going to Michigan State, Oregon, with the Ducks traveling to East Lansing to take on Sparty. Last year, it was a great football game into the beginning of the 4th quarter. Then Oregon put on the throttle and raced away from Michigan State. At that point, it looked like disaster for the Big Ten. Ohio State lost to Virginia Tech that day. Michigan, which was supposed to be a factor in the Big Ten, lost to Notre Dame 28-0. There were other losses in the Big Ten. Obviously, Ohio State pulled off a bit of a miracle and did something that didn't look like it could be done, didn't look like they would have the opportunity, but Michigan State gained back respect. Ohio State beat them and went on to the national championship game. Coming off a strong postseason led by Ohio State, but also chipped in by Wisconsin and Michigan State, the Big Ten's got some credibility, so I don't think it's It's severe for the Big Ten, but it would be a notch in the belt, no question, taking on Oregon. I mirror your thoughts, echo your thoughts in regards to Oregon. It looks like the Pac-12 is completely up for grabs after they lose Mariota. They lose one of the better cornerbacks in college football, and were really torn up along the offensive front by the NFL draft. So is Oregon still the team in the Pac-12, or is it going to be a wide-open race? I really love this Oregon-Michigan State matchup, and they're probably composite going to be the two highest-ranked teams on our list entering this particular game. I would guess they're both going to be in the top 7 or 8 in the country at that point. At number 2, I'm going with you. No, actually, I believe I've selected a game that is not on your top 5 here. I'm going to the Notre Dame-Clemson game. So Clemson-Florida State is considered by Vegas to be a Clemson and Florida State, are considered to be pretty much neck and neck as the favorites in the ACC. Notre Dame has to go to Clemson. Notre Dame will probably start the season fringe top 10. I know some people are going to consider this an ACC game. I don't, because Notre Dame doesn't compete in the ACC for championships. I think it's a screwed up situation where they play 5 ACC games but don't compete for the championship. So they're not an ACC team. So I wrestled with that a bit and giving Notre Dame too much prominence in this list, because obviously they play nothing but non-conference games. So I go to Notre Dame-Clemson because Clemson is going to be on par with Florida State, expected to be on par to compete for an ACC championship, and who knows, maybe a college football playoff. And Notre Dame, obviously, this is one of their tougher games of the season. All right, at number 3, I go to your number 1 game, Wisconsin-Alabama. Wisconsin-LSU was the marquee matchup for the Badgers last year out of conference. They led it big into the third quarter by 17 points. Lost Melvin Gordon, lost a couple D tackles, started to give up running plays and big plays on offense, and things disintegrated for Wisconsin. LSU won that game. Wisconsin got a little payback against the SEC in the bowl season over Auburn. I think it's been a situation where Alabama's been the superior team against its big non-conference opponent in recent years, and there's been no doubt. It's been West Virginia, it's been Virginia Tech, it's been Michigan in the last 5 years. Can somebody stand up to Alabama on the national stage on opening night? Wisconsin very limited in the passing game. I don't know if they have the athletes. I know that they have the will. I know they have the technique and the fundamentals. I know that they have the massive offensive line, and despite losing Melvin Gordon, have Corey Clement, who ran for almost 1,000 yards the last 2 years. So I believe Wisconsin's going to slug it out and punch Alabama in the mouth. They have no issue with playing that kind of game. They're not going to be intimidated, but sheer athleticism, I think Alabama makes 4 or 5 plays, and they win it by a couple scores. All right, let's go to my number 4 game. This is a very traditional matchup, but considering the expectations at USC coming off a top 3 recruiting class, they only lost 4 games last year. They were close to being extremely good and a national factor. Steve Sarkisian coming into this season again off a 9-4 and a bowl victory off Nebraska, taking on Notre Dame. The Trojans completely embarrassed Notre Dame, and I'll kind of expand on your narrative, Mike, concerning Notre Dame. I'll even go back to the Lou Holtz years as being the last time Notre Dame was really significant and respected on the national level. Ty Willingham, Bob Davie took over. They were pretty much at every turn embarrassed on the national stage, whether it be in bowl games or big non-conference games. Got throttled by Ohio State and LSU in Fiesta Bowl and Sugar Bowl games in the mid-2000s. Got blasted a number of times by Florida State teams during that time as well. In recent years, again, the national championship game was at a point where we thought maybe Notre Dame was ready to compete, and they were not clearly. We'll see if Notre Dame can handle it against a USC, a team, again, that beat them, I believe, 49-14 last year at the Coliseum. And then at number 5, I like the Oklahoma-Tennessee matchup as well. I don't know if either of these schools is going to compete for a national championship this year, so the national championship criteria really factored into my top 5. Tennessee, I believe, 9-3. depending on where those losses fall and how they compete in the SEC East, is a great benchmark for them to overcome and get to that point of 9 wins after winning 5, then 7 the past 2 years. Oklahoma has lost on the big stage in recent years as well and is really disappointed. I saw a statistic recently that really outlined how Oklahoma has failed to live up and play up to its preseason ranking more than any other school in the country over the past decade. And Oklahoma now has taken a back seat to Baylor and TCU in its own conference and really needs to step it up to gain some respect, especially if Tennessee goes on to have the expected type season that we are envisioning at this point. So, again, those are my top 5 based on similar criteria to what you have. And, again, conference pride and what these conferences are perceived to be by the College Football Playoff Committee factors into this very much as well, Mike.
Absolutely. I think for the conferences, to go back to my opening statements, I think the strength of the conference is measured by teams 3 through 10. I think Ohio State is clearly the best team in the nation right now, but that doesn't make the Big Ten the best conference. I really think what makes the conference the best conference is your teams 3 through 10, or in the case of the Big 12, 3 through 8. That middle, the 75% of the teams in the middle. And I think when you look at the Pac-12 and the SEC, you look at the teams slotted number 7, number 8, number 9, number 10. Those are really good quality teams. So I think when you look at the out-of-conference schedules, that's why games with Wisconsin and Clemson and Michigan State and Oklahoma, that's why those games are so important for the Big Ten and the ACC and the Big 12 to kind of gain a little bit of ground on the Pac-12 and the SEC.
Consider that we've got 65 Power 5 teams, and including Notre Dame into that mix, and they all play 4 non-conference games, and we struggle to find 10 or 12 games that are this big. I think it's an indictment against the scheduling process. The SEC plays 56 non-conference games. They played 11 Power 5 teams. It's not much better in the other conferences. They only played 14 or 15 out of those 50 or 55 games. I think there needs to be more games like this. I don't propose to beat up any particular team or conference by playing 4 really difficult games, but play one marquee opponent, play somebody who's pretty good, maybe in that mid-tier of another Power 5 conference, and then go play a couple Sun Belt or MAC teams or FCS teams with those other non-conference games. I think we're scraping to find these games, and there's not enough of them. You mentioned the SEC and the Pac-12 being the cream of the crop, or perceived to be the cream of the crop in college football. They played 0 games against one another. Fortunately, we've got Arizona State and Texas A&M, but we need to see those conferences tackle 5, 6, or 7 times in the non-conference. I believe that would be a better indicator of what we need to judge against come college football playoff time.
Yeah, but I think part of that's driven by the playoffs, Mark. I think that's a byproduct of the playoffs, and I've been saying this ever since people started complaining about the BCS. If you're the SEC or the Pac-12, you're not going to want to schedule tough out-of-conference games. You would rather be 12-0 or 11-1 at the end of the season, and then let your conference reputation get you into the playoffs, rather than play a top-tier Big 12, ACC, Big 10 team and risk getting into the playoffs. Playoffs are 2 extra games. They're going to be 2 extra games against a really good team, a top 4 team. You don't want to risk, if you're Alabama or Oregon or USC or Auburn, you don't want to risk playing 2 times against Wisconsin and Ohio State or Baylor and Clemson. You risk injury, you risk loss. I think a lot of the weakness of schedules, a weakness of out-of-conference schedules, is a byproduct of the college football playoff system. I really do. I think fans want their cake and want to eat it at the same time.
I have the framework of a formula schedule in my mind. I got to work out the nuts and bolts and the logistics of fitting all the teams in and having the formula play out like an NFL. But I'm not trying to create parity. I'm trying to create equality among the non-conference schedules. And I think what it's going to be is a really difficult opponent based on last year's standings, and then like a game against a Power 5 5th or 6th place team, middle tier, and then it's going to be 2 other games that you can play against a non-Power 5 or an FCS team. All right, Mike, appreciate
Yeah, go read my article on Last Word on Sports, Mark. I've broken down. I made 4 power teams. I've broken down the schedule to get a little bit of equity there. The other thing that drives college football being different than the NFL is regionalism. You don't have that in the NFL. You have regionalism in college football, and that's the biggest driver of the unequal schedules.
Definitely. All right, Mike Loveall of Last Word on Sports, breaking down the best non-conference games to look out for this coming fall.
Thanks, Mark.